The gardens of Schönbrunn Palace gleamed under the waning moon, frost-dusting each topiary and statue like powdered sugar. Winter had come early to Vienna that year, 1908, the same year Emperor Franz Joseph celebrated his Diamond Jubilee. 60 years of rule had left the old monarch stooped and weary, his famous whiskers now brittle and white as the December snow. Winifred Grayson pulled her thin woolen cloak tighter around her shoulders as she hurried through the servants' corridor. 6 months in the imperial household, and still she hadn't grown accustomed to the pre-dawn chill of the palace. The English girl's breath formed clouds before her face as she balanced a silver tray of correspondence that needed sorting before His Imperial Majesty's breakfast. "Mind yourself," hissed Frau Kohler, the head housekeeper, as Winifred nearly collided with her at a corner. "The correspondence goes to Secretary Jäger, not directly to His Majesty." "How many times must you be told the proper channels, Miss Grayson?" Winifred dipped into a quick curtsy, careful not to disturb the letters. "My apologies, Frau Kohler. I was told Baron von Kessler requested these be processed with urgency." The older woman's face softened fractionally. "Very well. But remember your place. English or not, you're a palace maid here, nothing more. Nothing more." The words followed Winifred like a shadow as she made her way toward the administrative wing. They weren't untrue, officially. What the imperial household didn't know about Winifred Grayson would fill volumes. Her father, the British ambassador's most trusted intelligence officer, had died under mysterious circumstances 6 months earlier. His last letter to her had been vague but urgent, something rotten at the heart of the dual monarchy. Trust no one. The dance continues. The dance had been their code since childhood. International diplomacy was a dance, he'd explained. Everyone moving in prescribed patterns, maintaining appearances while pursuing hidden agendas. Winifred had used her mother's Austrian connections to secure a position in the imperial household, a position far beneath her education and station, to discover what her father had meant. As she rounded another corner, she nearly collided with a tall figure emerging from the archives. "Pardon me," she murmured in German, eyes downcast as was expected of her station. "No harm done," came the reply in perfect English, the accent cultured but with a distinct Viennese lilt. She looked up, startled, into the face of a man perhaps 10 years her senior. His dark hair was neatly parted, his mustache trimmed in the modern fashion, and his eyes, a startling shade of amber, regarded her with curiosity. "You're the English girl," he said. "Miss Grayson, is it not?" Winifred cursed her fair complexion as she felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Yes, sir. I'm surprised you would know. Foreign staff are rare enough to be noted. I'm Frederick Jäger, undersecretary to the Imperial Cabinet." The very man she'd been sent to find. Winifred dropped into a proper curtsy. "An honor, Herr Undersecretary. Those need to come to me, I believe." He nodded at the correspondence tray. "I can take them now." As she handed him the tray, their fingers brushed. A jolt of awareness passed between them, and Winifred saw his eyes widen slightly. "Thank you, Miss Grayson. Perhaps you might assist me in sorting these? Baron von Kessler mentioned they require immediate attention, and my regular assistant is ill." It was most improper, a palace maid working directly with a senior imperial official. Yet it was exactly the opportunity Winifred had been seeking for months. "If Frau Kohler approves, sir, I would be happy to assist." His mouth curved in a smile that transformed his serious face. "Leave Frau Kohler to me." 2 hours later, Winifred sat across from Frederick Jäger in his office, translating a series of English diplomatic communiques into German. She was careful to appear less fluent than she was, occasionally asking him to clarify a phrase she understood perfectly. "Your German is quite good for someone who has been here only 6 months, he observed, studying her over the rim of his spectacles. "My mother was Austrian, sir. From Salzburg." "Ah, that explains it." He set down his pen. "And what brought you to service in the imperial household rather than, say, a position more suited to someone of your obvious education?" The question was pointed, dangerous, even. Winifred chose her words carefully. After my parents' deaths, I found myself with limited options. My mother's distant cousin suggested service here would be stable. My condolences on your loss. His eye softened with what appeared to be genuine sympathy. Both parents, then? My father only recently. A carriage accident in Vienna, actually. She kept her voice steady, though speaking of it still pained her. I never learned the exact circumstances. Something flickered across Frederick Jäger's face, so quickly she might have imagined it. He opened his mouth to respond when the door swung open. Baron von Kessler, chief of the Emperor's military chancellery, stood in the doorway. His cold gaze swept from Frederick to Winifred. Jäger! A word. His eyes narrowed at Winifred. Alone. You may go, Miss Grayson, Frederick said, his tone once again formal. Thank you for your assistance. As she curtsied and slipped past the Baron, she heard him hiss, Are you mad, having a servant, an English servant, handling sensitive documents? The door closed before she could hear Frederick's response. Heart-pounding, Winifred made her way back to the servants' quarters, where she was immediately assigned to polishing silver for an upcoming diplomatic reception. Over the next 2 weeks, Frederick Jäger found various pretexts to request Winifred's assistance. Translation work, organizing correspondence, even accompanying him to the Imperial Library to retrieve references. Each interaction was formal, proper, and yet, beneath the propriety, Winifred sensed something growing between them. A recognition, perhaps. A curiosity that mirrored her own. During one such session, as they worked in companionable silence in the small antechamber adjacent to the Imperial archives, Frederick suddenly spoke. Your father. He was attached to the British embassy, was he not? Winifred nearly dropped the volume of diplomatic protocols she was holding. How did you know that? Frederick's expression remained carefully neutral. I make it my business to know the backgrounds of those who handle sensitive materials. William Grayson was your father's name, I believe. Listed officially as a cultural attaché. The word officially hung in the air between them. Yes, she said cautiously. Though I'm afraid I knew little of his work. A shame about the carriage accident. Frederick's eyes held hers. Especially given that there was no record of such an accident filed with the Vienna police that day. I slid down Winifred's spine. What are you implying, Herr Jäger? He leaned forward, voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Only that coincidences trouble me, Miss Grayson. Just as it troubles me that a well-educated daughter of a British diplomat would take a position as a palace maid mere weeks after her father's mysterious death. She should deny everything, feign confusion, perhaps even tears. Instead, Winifred found herself asking, does it trouble you enough to report these coincidences? That depends, he said, on whether we share common concerns about certain activities within the imperial court. Before she could respond, the bells chimed the hour. Frederick stood abruptly. I'm expected at the military council. We will continue this conversation another time. That night, Winifred lay awake in her narrow bed in the servants' quarters, her mind racing. Frederick Jäger clearly suspected her true purpose, yet he had not exposed her. Was he testing her? Setting a trap? Or was he suggesting they might be allies? Her father's last letter remained hidden in a hollow book in her small trunk. Something rotten at the heart of the dual monarchy. Could Frederick know what that meant? The next morning brought a flurry of activity to the palace. The Archduke Franz Ferdinand would be arriving for the Emperor's birthday celebrations, and with him, dignitaries from across the empire and beyond. Winifred found herself assigned to prepare guest chambers in the East Wing, far from Frederick's offices. 3 days passed without seeing him. On the 4th day, as she polished the brass fixtures in the diplomatic reception room, a folded note was pressed into her hand by a passing footman. From Undersecretary Jäger, he muttered. Most urgent. When she was alone, Winifred unfolded the note. The dance continues. Lunar Garden. Midnight. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Her father's exact phrase. How could Frederick know it? She burned the note in the flame of her polishing candle, watching the paper curl and blacken. That night, Winifred slipped from the servants' dormitory after the final bell, wrapping her darkest shawl around her shoulders. The lunar garden could only mean one place, the secluded section of the palace grounds where white flowers had been planted in circular patterns to catch and reflect the moonlight. Frost crunched beneath her boots as she made her way through the sleeping garden. The moon was nearly full, casting enough light to navigate without a lamp. The lunar garden lay just ahead, its pale blooms ghostly in the silver light. Frederick Jäger stood beside a marble bench, his tall figure silhouetted against the night sky. He turned at the sound of her approach, his face grave. "You came." "You used my father's words," she replied. "How did you know them?" Frederick gestured for her to sit. When she did, he remained standing, his gaze fixed on the distant palace windows. "I knew your father, Miss Grayson. We corresponded for nearly a year before his death." Winifred's breath caught. "Corresponded about what?" "A conspiracy that threatens not just the Habsburg monarchy, but the peace of Europe." He finally looked at her, his expression somber. "Your father discovered evidence that elements within the imperial military are actively working to provoke a war with Serbia, a war that could draw in Russia, then France, then Britain. Why would anyone want that? Power. Profit. Ideological purity." Frederick's mouth twisted. "Take your pick. There are those who believe the empire has grown soft, that only war can restore its greatness." Winifred thought of the aging emperor, of the fracturing empire he struggled to hold together. "And my father was gathering evidence. Names. Plans." Frederick's voice dropped. "He was close, too close. That's why they killed him." "They?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "A faction led by men very close to the throne. Including Baron von Kessler." The name sent a chill through her. The Baron's cold eyes, his suspicious glance when he found her with Frederick. "Why are you telling me this? Why risk yourself?" Frederick paced a few steps, moonlight catching on the sharp planes of his face. "Because I believed in what your father was trying to do. Because I love my country too much to watch it be driven to destruction by warmongers." He paused. "And because I need your help." "My help?" "I'm just a palace maid." "Yes. Invisible. Unremarkable. Able to move through rooms where neither diplomats nor soldiers would be welcome." He returned to stand before her. "Your father had compiled a dossier, names, dates, transcripts of meetings. He hid it somewhere in the palace before he died. We need to find it." Winifred rose from the bench, suddenly aware of how alone they were, how dangerous this conversation had become. "How do I know I can trust you?" Frederick reached into his coat and withdrew a small object, a silver pocket watch. He held it out to her. With trembling fingers, Winifred took it, immediately recognizing the engraving on the case, a pattern of intertwined oak leaves surrounding a tiny dancer. Her father's watch. The watch that had been missing when his body was returned to her. "He gave this to me the day before he died," Frederick said softly. "He told me if anything happened to him, I should find his daughter and return it to her. That you would understand its significance." Winifred pressed the catch, and the watch sprang open to reveal not just the timepiece but a secondary compartment beneath it, a compartment holding a tiny key. "The key to his secrets," she whispered. Frederick nodded. "And perhaps the key to preventing a war." In that moment, as moonlight silvered the garden around them and the palace loomed in the distance like a sleeping giant, Winifred made her decision. She would trust this man, not fully, not yet, but enough to take the next step in her father's dance. "I'll help you," she said, closing the watch and tucking it into her dress pocket. "But we must be exceedingly careful." "We will be." His eyes held hers, and for a moment, something beyond their shared purpose passed between them, a recognition, a connection that made her heart flutter treacherously in her chest. As they began to discuss their plan, neither noticed the shadow that detached itself from behind a distant hedge and moved silently back toward the palace. The next morning brought a change in Winifred's duties. Without explanation, she was reassigned from the guest chambers to the imperial ballroom, where preparations were underway for the emperor's birthday celebration. The timing struck her as suspicious. The ballroom was far from both the archives and Frederick's offices. As she polished the vast expanse of parquet flooring alongside a dozen other maids, Countess Marianna von Ehrlich, the emperor's niece and notorious gossip, entered with her ladies-in-waiting. "The Archduke arrives tomorrow," the Countess announced, her voice carrying across the ballroom as if she were on stage. "And with him, that common wife of his. The Emperor has forbidden her to appear at the state dinner, of course." Winifred kept her head down, rubbing wax into the floor in small, careful circles. Court politics were of little interest to her, except as they might relate to the conspiracy Frederick had described. "And have you heard about Undersecretary Jäger?" the Countess continued, her voice dropping to a stage whisper that nevertheless carried clearly. "Apparently, he's being investigated for irregularities in diplomatic communications. Baron von Kessler himself ordered the inquiry." Winifred's hand stilled momentarily before she forced herself to continue working. Her mind raced. Was Frederick already under suspicion? Had their meeting been observed? "They say he might be relieved of his duties before the celebration," one of the ladies-in-waiting added. "Such a shame. He's quite handsome for a bureaucrat." The women's laughter echoed through the ballroom as they continued their tour of the preparations. When they had moved to the far end of the room, Winifred felt a nudge against her shoulder. An older maid named Greta slipped a folded note beside Winifred's polishing cloth. "From a friend," she whispered without looking up from her work. Winifred waited until the Countess and her entourage had departed before unfolding the note. "Danger. They suspect. Meet me in the Empress's Rose Conservatory after Vespers. The dance grows complex." The handwriting was Frederick's, but something about the phrasing struck her as odd. The Empress's Rose Conservatory was rarely used in winter, located in a distant wing of the palace complex. And after Vespers was vague. Vespers bells rang at different times depending on the church. Instinct made her hesitate. Her father had taught her to question everything, especially that which seemed straightforward. She tucked the note into her pocket and continued her work, mind turning over possibilities. That afternoon, as she helped prepare linens for the state bedchambers, Winifred caught sight of Frederick in a corridor, deep in conversation with an Imperial Guard captain. He looked tense but unharmed. When he glanced her way, there was no flicker of recognition in his eyes, precisely as there should not be in public. But as he turned to leave, he adjusted his cuffs in a particular way, 3 quick tugs on his right sleeve. It was a signal her father had taught her years ago. "Danger. Do not approach." The note, then, had not come from Frederick. It was a trap. That evening, instead of going to the Rose Conservatory, Winifred used her cleaning duties to make her way to the servants' entrance nearest Frederick's offices. As she suspected, 2 men in plain clothes, but with the unmistakable bearing of military men, stood watching the corridor. She doubled back, taking a circuitous route through the kitchen gardens, and slipped into the administrative wing through a service door normally used for coal delivery. The offices were dark, but she knew Frederick often worked late into the night. When she reached his door, she knocked softly in a pattern, 2 quick, 1 slow, 2 quick. After a moment, the door opened just enough for her to slip inside. Frederick closed and locked it behind her. His office was illuminated only by a single lamp, its light carefully shielded from the windows. "You didn't go to the conservatory," he said, relief evident in his voice. "It seemed unlikely you would choose such a location." He smiled grimly. "You have good instincts. Von Kessler's men have been watching me since yesterday. They intercepted and read my correspondence, questioned my assistant." He gestured to his desk, where papers were stacked haphazardly. "They're building a case against me, treason, most likely. Can you disprove it?" "Not without revealing what I know about their plans for Serbia." He ran a hand through his hair, disheveling it in a way that made him look younger, more vulnerable. "They'll have me arrested within days. Hours, perhaps." Winifred felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. Then we must find my father's dossier immediately. I've been thinking about that key. Frederick moved to his desk and unrolled a set of palace blueprints. Your father had access to the diplomatic reception rooms, the archives, and occasionally the imperial apartments during his visits. The key is small, too small for a door, but perhaps a lockbox, Winifred finished. Or a drawer. She thought for a moment. The Emperor's study has a cabinet of miniature drawers for organizing correspondence. Each drawer has a tiny lock. Frederick looked up sharply. How would you know that? I was assigned to dust it last month. Most of the drawers were unlocked, but several were secured. She reached into her pocket and withdrew her father's watch. The key is the right size. The Emperor's study is heavily guarded. No one enters without express permission. No one important, Winifred corrected. But the maids clean it daily while His Majesty takes his morning ride. I can volunteer for the duty tomorrow. Frederick shook his head. Too dangerous. If you're caught searching the drawers, I won't be caught. She stepped closer, determination hardening her voice. My father died for this, Mr. Jäger. I won't let his sacrifice be in vain. Their eyes met in the lamplight. Something shifted in Frederick's expression, a softening, a surrender. Very well. But we need a contingency plan. If you find the dossier, you can't bring it directly to me. I'm being watched too closely. They spent the next hour crafting a plan, speaking in hushed tones as the palace settled into its nighttime rhythms around them. When they finished, Frederick walked her to the service door. Be careful, he said, his hand brushing hers in the darkness. If anything happens, nothing will happen, she assured him, trying to project more confidence than she felt. The dance continues, remember. His fingers tightened around hers briefly. The dance continues. The following morning, Winifred volunteered to clean the imperial study, citing her experience with the delicate artifacts it contained. Frau Kohler, preoccupied with preparations for the evening's state dinner, assigned her the duty without much thought. The Emperor's study was a testament to a lifetime of rule, maps of territories gained and lost, photographs of diplomatic visits spanning decades, gifts from monarchs long dead. Winifred dusted efficiently, keeping one ear tuned to the corridor outside as she worked her way toward the correspondence cabinet. When she reached it, she withdrew the tiny key from her pocket and tried it in the first locked drawer. It didn't fit. Nor did it fit the second or third. The fourth drawer, however, accepted the key smoothly. The lock turned with a barely audible click. Heart-pounding, Winifred slid open the drawer to reveal a small leather portfolio bound with string. Just as she was about to reach for it, voices approached in the corridor. She closed the drawer quickly, but left it unlocked, and moved to dust a nearby bookshelf. The door opened to admit Baron von Kessler and another man in military uniform. They stopped short at the sight of her. "What are you doing here?" the Baron demanded. Winifred cursed deeply. "Cleaning, Baron." "By order of Frau Kohler." Von Kessler's eyes narrowed. "The Emperor will return from his ride momentarily. You may finish later." "Of course, sir." She gathered her cleaning supplies and moved toward the door, careful to keep her eyes downcast. As she passed the Baron, he reached out suddenly and grasped her wrist. "You're the English girl," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "The one who has been assisting Undersecretary Jäger." Winifred's mouth went dry. "I have assisted many officials with translations, sir, as directed by my supervisors." Von Kessler studied her face, his grip painfully tight. "Interesting that you should be assigned to His Majesty's private study, isn't it, General?" He turned to his companion. "Especially today." The general's gaze was cold. "Most interesting." "I merely go where I am told, sir," Winifred said, forcing a tremor into her voice. "Please, I don't want any trouble." After a long moment, the Baron released her. "See that you don't find any, girl. You may go." Winifred cursed again and left, feeling their eyes boring into her back. She had failed, the dossier remained in the drawer. But she had unlocked it, and now she needed to warn Frederick. She hurried through the servants' corridors toward the administrative wing, only to find it unusually busy with guards and officials. As she hesitated at an intersection, trying to decide how to proceed, a hand closed around her upper arm. "Come with me," Frederick Jäger said quietly, steering her into an alcove. He was dressed formally, as if for a ceremony, his expression tightly controlled. "The drawer is unlocked, fourth from the top," she whispered urgently. But von Kessler interrupted, "I know. He's ordered my arrest." Frederick's voice was calm, his eyes scanning the corridor. "They're preparing the papers now." Horror washed through her. "We have to listen carefully." He pressed something into her hand, a letter, sealed with wax. "Tonight is the Emperor's birthday celebration. Every dignitary in Vienna will attend. You'll be there too. As a servant, perhaps, but no. As a guest." He smiled faintly at her confusion. "The British ambassador's niece, newly arrived from London. The invitation is in the envelope, along with instructions and an address where suitable attire awaits you." "That's impossible. Everyone would know I'm an imposter." "Not everyone. Only those who have actually met the real Miss Catherine Wells, who conveniently remained in London with a winter cold." He squeezed her hand. "This is our only chance. The celebration will empty the private apartments. You can retrieve the dossier while I create a distraction in the ballroom. And then? Then we deliver it directly to the Emperor. With evidence of the conspiracy in his hands, even von Kessler won't be able to silence us." It was audacious, reckless, even. Yet Winifred felt a surge of determination. "Very well. But what about your arrest?" "Delayed until tomorrow, thanks to some bureaucratic maneuvering by friends in the foreign ministry." His expression grew serious. "But it's only a reprieve. By midnight, my career, and possibly my freedom, will be over." Before she could respond, voices approached from around the corner. Frederick stepped back, immediately resuming the proper distance between a senior official and a servant. "That will be all," he said loudly. "See that it's done properly." Winifred curtsied. "Yes, sir." As she hurried away, the letter burning a hole in her pocket, she realized that whatever happened that night would change everything, not just for her and Frederick, but perhaps for Europe itself. The address in Frederick's letter led Winifred to a modest townhouse in Vienna's 8th district. An elderly woman answered the door and ushered her inside without question, leading her to a bedroom where a ball gown of midnight blue silk lay across the bed. "Herr Jäger said you would need assistance preparing," the woman said, revealing herself to be Frederick's former nanny. "We haven't much time." 2 hours later, Winifred hardly recognized her reflection. Her hair was styled in the latest fashion, adorned with pearl combs. The gown, which fit as if made for her, featured delicate silver embroidery that caught the light with every movement. Long gloves concealed her work-roughened hands. "You look like a princess," the old woman said with satisfaction. "Now, remember, you are Miss Catherine Wells, niece of the British ambassador. You've spent time in Vienna before, so some familiarity is expected, but your German should be limited, just enough to be polite." Winifred nodded, mentally reviewing the details Frederick had provided. "And my invitation?" The woman handed her an embossed card bearing the imperial seal. "The carriage is waiting. You'll arrive precisely at 9, when the receiving line is at its busiest." The journey to Schönbrunn Palace felt surreal. Just that morning, Winifred had scrubbed floors and dusted furniture in the very room she would now enter as a guest. As the carriage approached the illuminated palace, she touched the hidden pocket sewn into her gown, confirming that the tiny key was still secure. Her arrival went exactly as Frederick had planned. The receiving line was crowded with diplomats and nobility, the imperial staff too busy to give more than a cursory glance at her invitation. When her name was announced, Miss Catherine Wells of London, several heads turned, but in the crush of arrivals, no one had time to question her presence. The ballroom was transformed from the chamber she had polished yesterday. Crystal chandeliers blazed with electric light, casting rainbows across the polished floor. An orchestra played Strauss from a balcony above, and hundreds of Europe's elite moved in practiced patterns across the dance floor. Winifred accepted a glass of champagne from a passing footman, a young man she recognized from the servants' hall, though his eyes showed no recognition as he bowed and moved on. She sipped slowly, scanning the room for Frederick while avoiding direct conversation. She found him near a cluster of military officers, his formal attire distinguishing him as a senior civil servant rather than aristocracy. Their eyes met briefly across the crowded room, and he gave an almost imperceptible nod toward a gilded clock at the far end of the ballroom. 9:30. They had agreed she would make her attempt at 9:45, when the first formal toast to the emperor would draw all attention to the main dais. Winifred circulated carefully around the perimeter of the ballroom, playing the role of an overwhelmed young lady taking in the splendor of her first imperial ball. As she approached a set of tall doors leading to an adjoining salon, she noticed Baron von Kessler watching her from across the room. A chill ran down her spine as his eyes narrowed in recognition. He began to move through the crowd toward her. With her heart pounding, Winifred slipped through the doors into the salon, where smaller groups conversed away from the music. She moved quickly toward a service door partially hidden behind a tapestry, praying it would be unlocked. The door opened at her touch, revealing a familiar servants' corridor. Winifred gathered her skirts and hurried through it, the sounds of the ball fading behind her. She had memorized the route to the emperor's study, but navigating it in a ball gown proved more challenging than in her maid's uniform. When she reached the study, the corridor was empty, exactly as Frederick had predicted. The guards would be positioned in the ballroom during the celebration. Still, she listened at the door for a full minute before easing it open. The study lay in shadow, illuminated only by moonlight filtering through tall windows. Winifred closed the door behind her and moved swiftly to the correspondence cabinet, her gloved fingers finding the fourth drawer. It slid open at her touch, revealing the leather portfolio exactly as she had left it. With trembling hands, she lifted it from the drawer and untied the string binding it closed. Inside were documents, maps, and photographs, evidence of secret meetings between Austrian military officials and German arms manufacturers, transcripts of conversations plotting provocation along the Serbian border, financial records showing massive investments in munitions companies. At the center was a memorandum bearing von Kessler's signature, outlining a plan to force the emperor's hand through a regrettable but necessary incident that would demand military response. Winifred's blood ran cold as she realized the full scope of the conspiracy. This wasn't merely warmongering, it was a plan to manipulate an aging emperor into a conflict that could engulf the continent. She carefully retied the portfolio and secured it inside her gown's hidden pocket. As she turned to leave, the study door swung open. Baron von Kessler stood in the doorway, his face illuminated by the lamp he carried. "Miss Grayson," he said, his voice deceptively pleasant. "Or should I say, Miss Wells? How enterprising of you to advance from maid to nobility in a single day." Winifred backed away, her mind racing. "Baron, I can explain, I'm certain you can." He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "Just as your father tried to explain when we discovered his espionage." His smile was cold. A shame about his accident. Fury rose in Winifred's chest, momentarily overwhelming her fear. "You murdered him." Such an ugly word. Von Kessler set his lamp on the emperor's desk. "Your father interfered in matters beyond his understanding. As does Undersecretary Jäger. As do you." His gaze dropped to where her hand pressed against her gown, securing the hidden pocket. "I see you found what you came for." He took a step toward her. Winifred backed away until she felt the window ledge against her back. "The emperor will see these documents," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "He'll know what you're planning." Von Kessler laughed softly. "His Majesty sees what we wish him to see. A 78-year-old man who has outlived his heir, his wife, and his century. Do you really believe he would trust the word of an English spy over his most loyal advisers?" Another step closer. Winifred glanced desperately around the study, looking for an escape route, a weapon, anything. "Now, be a sensible girl and give me the portfolio." Perhaps we can arrange a more dignified end for you than your father received. The sounds of the ball floated distantly through the palace, music, laughter, the murmur of hundreds of voices. No one would hear her if she screamed. No one would come. No one except the study door burst open. Frederick Jäger stood in the doorway, his formal composure gone, a pistol gripped in his right hand. Step away from her, Baron. Von Kessler turned slowly, his expression shifting from surprise to amusement. Ah, Jäger. Right on cue. How perfectly tragic, the disgraced bureaucrat and the foreign spy, caught in the act of stealing imperial documents. The only disgrace here is a decorated officer plotting against his own emperor. Frederick's aim remained steady as he entered the room. Miss Grayson, come here please. Winifred began to edge around the desk toward Frederick, but von Kessler moved with surprising speed for a man of his age, seizing her arm and pulling her against him. Cold metal pressed against her ribs, a small pistol, withdrawn from his formal coat. I think not, the Baron said. Lower your weapon, Jäger, or the lady experiences an unfortunate accident of her own. Frederick's face went pale, but his aim didn't waver. If you harm her, you'll be dead before she hits the floor. And then what? You'll be executed for murdering a baron of the Empire. Von Kessler's grip tightened painfully on Winifred's arm. Neither of you leaves this room with those documents. The moment stretched, taut as a bowstring. Winifred felt the baron's breath against her ear, smelled the pomade in his meticulously groomed hair. Her gaze met Frederick's across the room, and in his eyes she read not just determination but something deeper, something that made her heart contract painfully in her chest. In that instant, she made her decision. The documents, she said, her voice remarkably calm. You can have them, Baron. Just let me go. Von Kessler's grip loosened slightly. Wise choice, my dear. Winifred, no, Frederick began. She raised her hand to silence him, then slowly reached for her hidden pocket. Please, Frederick. It's not worth dying for. As her fingers closed around the portfolio, Winifred shifted her weight and drove her heel down with all her strength onto the Baron's foot. Simultaneously, she twisted out of his grip and hurled herself to the floor. A shot cracked through the room. Winifred looked up to see von Kessler stagger backward, a dark stain spreading across his white formal shirt. Frederick stood with his pistol still raised, smoke curling from its barrel. Are you hurt? He demanded, rushing to her side. No. No, I'm fine. She clutched the portfolio to her chest as he helped her to her feet. Von Kessler slumped against the Emperor's desk, his own weapon clattering to the floor. His breathing came in wet, labored gasps. You've signed your death warrant, Jäger, he managed. Shooting a baron in the Emperor's own study. Perhaps, Frederick said grimly. Or perhaps I've prevented high treason against the Emperor. We'll let His Majesty decide which. Voices and running footsteps sounded in the corridor outside. The shot had been heard. Winifred looked at Frederick in panic. They'll arrest you, she whispered. We'll never reach the Emperor now. To her astonishment, Frederick smiled. That, my dear, is where you're wrong. The door flew open again. Imperial guards flooded into the room, weapons drawn. Behind them came a stooped figure in a white formal uniform laden with decorations. Emperor Franz Joseph, ruler of Austria-Hungary for 60 years, surveyed the scene with sharp blue eyes that belied his advanced age. What is the meaning of this? He demanded, his famous whiskers quivering with indignation. Frederick immediately dropped to one knee, his head bowed. Winifred followed suit, sinking into a deep curtsy despite the terror gripping her. Your Imperial Majesty, Frederick said. I regret the disturbance to your celebration. I was forced to defend this lady from Baron von Kessler's attack. The Emperor's gaze shifted to von Kessler, who was being attended by a military physician. Is this true, Baron? Von Kessler's face contorted with pain and rage. Lies, Your Majesty. These two were stealing documents. State secrets. I caught them, in the act. Documents. The Emperor's sharp gaze returned to Winifred. What is he talking about, young woman? And who are you? Winifred rose from her curtsy, still clutching the portfolio. My name is Winifred Grayson, Your Majesty. My father was William Grayson of the British Embassy. He was murdered for discovering a conspiracy against Your Majesty, a conspiracy led by Baron von Kessler. Murmurs ran through the guards. The Emperor's expression remained inscrutable. These are serious accusations. What evidence do you have? With trembling hands, Winifred presented the portfolio. Everything is here, Your Majesty. Plans to provoke war with Serbia against your wishes. Financial arrangements with arms manufacturers. Even discussions about forcing Your Majesty's hand through manufactured incidents. The Emperor took the portfolio and opened it, his eyes scanning the first document. His face hardened as he read. These appear to be in the Baron's hand, he said finally. And bear his signature. Forgeries, von Kessler gasped from where he lay. Your Majesty cannot believe the word of an English spy. Actually, Frederick said, rising to his feet, Her Majesty the Queen of England might disagree. As would my superiors in the Imperial Intelligence Service. The Emperor raised a bushy eyebrow. Explain yourself, Jäger. I've been working under Your Majesty's direct orders for 2 years, investigating rumors of a war faction within the military chancellery. William Grayson was my British counterpart. When he was killed, I sought out his daughter, knowing she had come to Vienna seeking the truth about her father's death. Winifred stared at him in shock. You knew who I was all along. Frederick's eyes met hers apologetically. Not at first. But after our second meeting, yes. Your father described you too well for me not to recognize you. The Emperor cleared his throat impatiently. So this shooting was the culmination of an operation sanctioned by Your Majesty's intelligence director, Count Esterhazy. We needed to catch von Kessler with irrefutable evidence of his conspiracy. Von Kessler struggled to sit up, his face ashen. Your Majesty cannot believe these fabrications. Silence. The Emperor's voice cracked like a whip. You will have your chance to speak at your court-martial, Baron. He turned to the guard captain. Remove the Baron to the military hospital. He is under arrest for conspiracy and treason. As the guards moved to obey, the Emperor fixed his penetrating gaze on Winifred. As for you, Miss Grayson, it seems the Empire owes you and your father a debt. Although your methods are unorthodox. She curtsied again. I only wish to honor my father's memory, Your Majesty. The old man's eye softened fractionally. Undersecretary Jäger, you will escort Miss Grayson back to the ball. I believe my birthday celebration continues, does it not? A ghost of a smile appeared beneath his whiskers. And I shall examine these documents most carefully. Yes, Your Majesty. Frederick bowed deeply. The Emperor paused at the door. Oh, and Jäger. Your Majesty. Your promotion to ministerial counselor will be announced tomorrow. The Empire needs men of your initiative. With that, he was gone, flanked by his guards, leaving Winifred and Frederick alone in the study. For a long moment, neither spoke. The reality of what had just occurred, what they had just survived, seemed too enormous to comprehend immediately. You knew, Winifred finally said. All along, you knew who I was. Frederick's expression was contrite. Not at first. I suspected after our conversation about your father. I confirmed it when I saw how you handled the diplomatic correspondence. No ordinary maid would understand the nuances of those documents. Why didn't you tell me you were Imperial Intelligence? For the same reason you didn't tell me you were William Grayson's daughter. He took a step closer. In our world, trust must be earned slowly. Winifred felt a bewildering mixture of emotions, relief, betrayal, exhaustion, and something else she wasn't quite ready to name. And did I earn your trust? She asked softly. Completely. Frederick's gaze held hers. More than that, you earned my admiration. Your courage, your determination, your brilliance." He trailed off, suddenly appearing uncertain, so different from the confident intelligence officer of moments ago. "The Emperor is expecting us to return to the ball," Winifred reminded him, though she made no move toward the door. "Yes." Frederick straightened his formal coat. "Though I'm afraid there's a problem with your cover identity. By now, the real Miss Wells's absence has likely been noted." "Then who shall I be?" He hesitated, then held out his hand to her. "Would Miss Winifred Grayson, daughter of one of Britain's most courageous diplomats, do me the honor of accompanying me to His Majesty's birthday celebration?" Winifred placed her hand in his, feeling the warmth of his fingers close around hers. "I believe she would." As Frederick led her from the study toward the distant music of the ballroom, Winifred felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Her father's murderer would face justice. The conspiracy he had uncovered was exposed. Europe might be spared the war that von Kessler and his allies had sought to ignite. And beside her walked a man who had risked everything for the same principles her father had died defending. The grand ballroom was still filled with light and music when they returned. A few curious glances followed them as Frederick led Winifred to the edge of the dance floor, but the shot and subsequent commotion had apparently been dismissed as some minor security matter, nothing to interrupt the Emperor's celebration. "May I have this dance, Miss Grayson?" Frederick asked formally, though his eyes held a warmth that belied his proper tone. "You may, Ministerial Councillor Jäger," she replied with a smile. As he guided her into the waltz, Winifred felt herself moving with a grace and confidence she had never known before. The moonlight streamed through the tall windows, bathing the dance floor in silver light, transforming the ballroom into a world of dreams. "What happens now?" she asked softly as they turned among the other couples. "That depends," Frederick said, his hand warm against the small of her back. Count Esterhazy mentioned that the Imperial Intelligence Service might benefit from an Anglo-Austrian liaison. "Is that an employment offer or a romantic proposition, Mr. Jäger?" His laugh was low and genuine. "Perhaps a bit of both, Miss Grayson. If that's not too presumptuous." As they turned again, Winifred caught sight of the Emperor standing on the dais, watching them with what might have been approval in his ancient eyes. "Not presumptuous at all," she said, returning her gaze to Frederick's face. "I believe my father would approve of continuing the dance." Frederick's smile deepened, reaching his amber eyes and transforming his serious face. "The dance continues, then." And as they whirled across the floor, two unlikely allies brought together by conspiracy and courage, Winifred knew that whatever future awaited them, in the imperial service, in the drawing rooms of European diplomacy, or simply in each other's company, it would be a future they would face together, step by perfectly matched step.